Okay, next I'm going to talk about learning targets 3, 4, and 5, 3, 4, 5, and 6. These are all going to go together in the retake, so you're just going to have to bear with me and watch the whole video. I'll try to go as efficiently as possible, but you do want to make sure that you watch through the whole thing so that you can do well when you do this retake. So learning target 3 is, I think, kind of most difficult. This is being able to choose a solution method. And then from there, we have 3 ways to solve a quadratic equation, and you need to be proficient at each of the 3 ways. Okay? So I'm going to start with the first 2, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the whole thing, and I'm just going to talk about learning target 3 first before I do any solving. So I'm going to talk about how I choose what to do. Okay, so I look at this first equation, and I know right away that it can be solved by square roots. And the reasoning behind that is that I can get x squared alone because there is no bx term. Meaning in my, this is kind of like, it's definitely not factored form or vertex form, and it's in general form, except that there's no bx term, there's just the x squared plus c, which means that I can move c over to the right, and then I can divide by a if I need to, and square root, and I've got an answer. Okay, so I know that's square rooting. Okay, the next one is also in general form, so I know that I'm not going to be able to take square root because there is a bx term, so I'm going to eliminate that one right away. So I know that it's between factoring and quadratic formula. And what I do to determine between these two is I first look at the value of a. The value of a is 1. There is a scale factor of 1. It's not stretched, it's not shrunk at all. So that means that it might be easy to factor. So I'm going to go ahead and say, assume that I might factor. And that's because it's in general form and a equals 1. Okay. I also want to think about how I can find the factors. So what I'm going to start thinking about is I'm going to start thinking about factors of 16. So you might write like 1 times 16, 2 times 8, and 4 times 4, because those are all the things that equal 16. And then you're going to start looking for ones that add to 10. And I can see that 2 times 8 would be my factors because 2 times 8 equal 16, and 2 plus 8 equals 10. Okay, so another way to put this more generally might be, since this is the C term and this is the B term, 16 is C and B is 10, that I'm looking for factors that multiply, or numbers that multiply to C that add to B. All right? Okay, next 2, I see that this one is not equal to 0, and I see that there is an x term, a term with an x, and as well as a term with an x squared. So I know that square roots are not going to work on this one. I'm going to be choosing between factoring and quadratic formula. So the first thing I'm going to do is add 2 to each side so that I can see it equal to 0. And then what I notice is that this value in the front, a, equals 3. Which means that I'm probably going to use the quadratic formula because it's going to be difficult to find factors because of that leading coefficient being greater than 1. Okay? And then same thing applies to this next one. So you might use the same reasoning. Now I'm going to skip over writing down everything because I'm talking out loud through my process and through my reasoning, but when you're on the test you're going to need to write down exactly why on each one. Right, for my last 2, I see I have a general form. We've got an x term, so there's no square roots possible. And then from there, I have to decide between factoring and quadratic formula. Either one will work. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say factoring because a equals 1. So I'm guessing I can think of some, I'm going to start looking at factors that multiply to C and add to B. And then my very last one here, I have to decide, it's not in general form. And when it's not in general form, and it's not already in factored form, I know that I'm probably not going to use either of these. I could expand out this first part and I could use the formula, or I could try to factor. But actually the quickest way to solve this is going to be to just take the square root. And that's because I can get this part, x minus 5 squared, alone by moving the 1 over to the other side of the equation. And then from there, you just have something squared equal to 64, and you can take the square root, and you'll find a nice answer. This is true that you can get the squared term alone anytime that you have vertex form. So my advice would be anytime that you have vertex form, you should take the square root as your solution method. Okay? All right, so now I'm going to go back and step through the solving of each one. So I have x squared minus 25 equals 0. I'm going to move the 25 over to the right since I'm trying to solve for x squared. Then I'm going to square root each side, leaving me with x equals positive and negative 5. Don't forget that most of the time you're going to have two solutions when you're solving for a quadratic equation. So don't forget when you square root that you're going to need to think about positive 5 and negative 5. All right, I've done a lot of the work for factoring on this one already because I figured out that 2 times 8 equals 16. That's my last one. 2 times 8 is the 16, and that 2 plus 8 gives me the 10. Okay, so I know that my factors can be x plus 2 and x plus 8 that equal to 0 because that's going to give me x squared plus 10x plus 16 once I FOIL. So I know that this is the factored form of that general. And then something that some of you forgot was that once you have your factors, then you have to also tell me what that means. That means that the solution for x is negative 2 and negative 8, because remember that we're looking for the values that we can plug in for x that will make the whole product here 0. Negative 2 will make the first part of the product equal to 0. And then negative 8 will make the second part. If I plug that in there, that'll make the second part of the product equal to 0. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just do the quadratic formula for one of these. It's going to be pretty similar in each case. So first of all, I'm going to look at this first one. I talked about how it has to be equal to 0. Remember that we're looking for it in general form, which means it has to be equal to 0 before you can do the quadratic formula. And then from there, we're going to pull out the numbers, the coefficient of x squared, the coefficient of x, and then the constant term for our a, b, and c. Okay? So then from there, I'm going to plug it into the formula. Now you had the formula available to you on the test, and you will on your retakes too. Just make sure that you actually put all the numbers in the right spot. So I know I have to do negative 7, negative b, plus or minus the square root, b squared, so 7 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. All right? And if I just, let's work on this part first underneath the square root sign. So I just want to work on this part first. So I'm going to think about doing 7 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2. That gives me 49 minus 4 times 3 is 12 times 2 is 24. So that means 49 minus 24, that's 25. Okay? So what I can do is I can think about this as negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 25 divided by 6, because 2 times 3 is 6. So the two things that I need to solve from here is I need to do negative 7 plus 5 divided by 6 and negative 7 minus 5 divided by 6. So this will give me negative 2 6, which I can reduce to negative 1/3. And this will give me negative 12 6, which I can reduce to negative 2. Okay? So there you go. I've got my two solutions. You just want to keep your work straight. Make sure you do two solutions, and don't forget to divide the whole thing by 2a at the end. All right, and we've got one more factoring here. We've got factoring with some negatives. So I want to think about the factors that multiply to 28. And then because I know that one of the two factors has to be negative because I want these to equal a negative 28, I'm going to think about taking the difference between them equal to negative 12. So I see that 2 and 14, the difference between those can become negative 12 if I make the 14 a negative. So I know that 2 times negative 14 will be negative 28, and 2 plus negative 14 will equal negative 12. So that means my factors are x plus 2, because it's a positive 2, and x minus 14, that's a negative 14. There's my factored form. And then from there, that means that my solution is x equals negative 2 and x equals positive 14. All right? Last one, taking the square root. Last time I had started off this problem already by moving the 1 over to the right-hand side by subtracting 1 from each side, and now this is where I'm at. So I'm going to take the square root of each side, and that'll leave me with x minus 5 equals positive or negative 8. So I'm going to split the problem. I'm going to solve x minus 5 equal to 8 and x minus 5 equal to negative 8. So adding 5 to each side, that gives me x equals 13. And adding 5 over here gives me x equals negative 3. So I've got my two solutions.